For 3,000 years, they ruled the Nile. Black pharaohs who conquered Egypt itself, warriors who faced down the Roman Empire, master metallurgists who forged weapons when Europe still worked in bronze. Yet their story has been erased, buried beneath the sands of Sudan, hidden in the shadows of their more famous neighbor to the north. They were called the Kingdom of Kush, the Nubians, the people of the land of gold. At their height, they controlled more pyramids than Egypt. They mummified their dead with greater precision. They built cities that rivaled Memphis and Thebes. And for a glorious century, they sat upon the throne of all Egypt as the 25th dynasty, Africa's black pharaohs. But who were they really? How did a kingdom south of Egypt become powerful enough to conquer the greatest civilization of the ancient world? And why has history forgotten Africa's most resilient empire? This is the untold story of Kush and Nubia. Today we journey to the heart of the ancient world, the Nile Valley. But we're not going to Egypt. We are traveling south, beyond the cataracts, beyond the borders of the pharaohs, into the land the ancients called Kush. For over 3,000 years, from approximately 2,500 BCE to 350 CE, the kingdom of Kush flourished in what is now Sudan. This civilization rose and fell in three distinct phases: the Kerma period, the Napatan period, and the Meroitic period. Each era brought new power, new culture, and new achievements that rivaled anything Egypt ever produced. This documentary will take you through the complete history of Kush, from its mysterious origins through its conquest of Egypt to its final transformation into one of Africa's most sophisticated Iron Age kingdoms. We'll meet the black pharaohs who ruled Egypt. We'll discover the warrior queens called Kandakes who defended their realm against Rome itself. We'll explore the hidden pyramids that outnumber those at Giza. But most importantly, we'll uncover the truth that has been buried for centuries: that African civilization didn't begin and end with Egypt. That south of the cataracts, another great power rose, one that would outlast the pharaohs, survive the Greeks, and stand defiant against the Romans. Welcome to the kingdom of Kush. Welcome to Africa's hidden empire. To understand Kush, we must first understand Nubia, the land itself. Nubia is a region that stretches along the Nile River from the first cataract at Aswan in southern Egypt, down through what is now northern Sudan. The name Nubia likely comes from the ancient Egyptian word Nab, meaning gold, for this was a land of extraordinary mineral wealth. The Nile flows north through Nubia, but unlike the smooth passage through Egypt, the river here is interrupted by 6 great cataracts, rocky rapids that made navigation difficult and created natural boundaries between kingdoms. These cataracts would define Nubian history, marking borders between competing powers and protecting Kush from northern invaders. The land was harsh but fertile where it mattered. Along the river banks, the annual flooding of the Nile created rich agricultural land. But beyond the river's reach stretched the Nubian desert, vast, scorching, and unforgiving. This geography created a people who were tough, resourceful, and fiercely independent. The story of Kush unfolds across 3,000 years of human history. When Kush first emerged around 2500 BCE, Egypt was already ancient, building its first pyramids. Mesopotamia's city-states were flourishing. The Indus Valley civilization was at its height. As Kush grew, it witnessed the rise and fall of empires. It saw the Hyksos invade Egypt. It watched the New Kingdom pharaohs build their monuments at Luxor and Karnak. It survived the Bronze Age collapse that destroyed civilizations across the Mediterranean. It faced the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. Throughout these millennia, Nubia occupied a unique position in the ancient world. It was the bridge between Mediterranean Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. Goods from the African interior, gold, ivory, ebony, incense, exotic animals, and enslaved people, flowed north through Nubia to Egypt and beyond. In return, manufactured goods, grain, and luxury items traveled south. This position made Nubia wealthy, but it also made it a target. From the beginning, Egypt and Nubia were intertwined, sometimes as trading partners, often as enemies, occasionally as one unified kingdom. The relationship was complex, marked by mutual influence, cultural exchange, and periodic warfare. The ancient Egyptians both admired and feared Nubia. Egyptian texts describe Nubia as Ta Seti, the land of the bow, acknowledging the legendary skill of Nubian archers. They called the region Kush, Wawat, and Irem at different periods. Egyptian art often depicted Nubians as enemies to be conquered, but Egyptian pharaohs also employed Nubian soldiers, married Nubian princesses, and adopted Nubian fashions. The truth is that Nubians and Egyptians were culturally similar in many ways. Both practiced mummification, both built pyramids, both worshipped similar gods, though with different emphasis. The Nubian language was distinct, but many Nubians spoke Egyptian, and trade between the regions was constant. But Egypt always saw itself as superior. During periods of strength, Egyptian pharaohs launched military campaigns into Nubia, building fortresses and extracting tribute. During Egypt's weak periods, Nubia reasserted its independence and sometimes raided north into Egypt itself. This dynamic, the push and pull between two Nile Valley powers, would define 3,000 years of history. The kingdom of Kush evolved through three distinct periods, each centered on a different capital city and each with its own character. The Kerma period, from approximately 2500 to 1500 BCE, saw the rise of the first great Nubian kingdom, centered on the city of Kerma, south of the Third Cataract. This civilization developed independently of Egypt, creating its own distinctive culture, architecture, and burial practices. The Napatan period, from approximately 1000 to 300 BCE, marked Kush's golden age. After a long Egyptian occupation, Kush re-emerged as a powerful kingdom centered on the city of Napata, near the sacred mountain of Jebel Bakar. During this era, Kushite kings conquered Egypt itself and ruled as the 25th dynasty. The Meroitic period, from approximately 300 BCE to 350 CE, saw the kingdom center shift south to Meroe. Here, Kush developed its own unique script, became an iron-working powerhouse, and evolved into a distinctly African civilization, less influenced by Egypt and more connected to the African interior. Each period would bring triumphs and disasters. Each would contribute to the legacy of one of Africa's greatest kingdoms. Who were the Nubians? What did they look like? What language did they speak? The people of Kush were African, dark-skinned, though skin tones varied from light brown to deep black, just as they do throughout Africa today. Ancient Egyptian art consistently depicts Nubians as darker than Egyptians themselves, and classical Greek and Roman sources describe them as Ethiopians, meaning people with burned faces. But physical appearance tells only part of the story. The Nubians spoke their own language distinct from Egyptian. During the Kerma period, they spoke an unknown ancient Nubian language. Later, they spoke Meroitic, which we can read phonetically today but still cannot fully translate because it's unrelated to any known language family. Nubians were renowned as warriors. The bow was their signature weapon. Nubian archers were so skilled that both Egypt and later Rome employed them as mercenaries. They also excelled in hand-to-hand combat using spears, axes, and swords. Their military prowess made them formidable opponents, but they were more than warriors. Nubians were skilled craftspeople, creating distinctive pottery with black-topped red ware. They were metallurgists who mastered bronze working and later became iron working specialists. They were architects who built unique circular burial mounds called tumuli, and later steep-sided pyramids that differed from Egyptian designs. The early rulers of Kerma remain largely anonymous to us. Unlike Egypt, with its detailed king lists, Kerma left no written records of its rulers' names during its classical period. We know them only through their magnificent tombs. The largest burial mounds at Kerma, some over 90 meters in diameter, contained the bodies of powerful kings, surrounded by hundreds of sacrificed servants and animals. These mass burials tell us that Kerma's rulers commanded absolute authority and the ability to mobilize enormous resources. Archaeological evidence suggests these rulers controlled a complex state with regional governors, organized military forces, and extensive trade networks. They maintained diplomatic and commercial relations with Egypt while fiercely defending their independence. Now we come to the Black Pharaohs, the Kushite kings who conquered Egypt. The first and perhaps greatest was Piye, also known as Pianki, who ruled from approximately 747 to 716 BCE. Piye was born into the royal family of Napata in the shadow of the sacred mountain Jebel Bakar. He inherited a kingdom that had grown strong during Egypt's weak third intermediate period. But Piye didn't just want to rule Kush. He believed he had a divine mandate to restore Egypt to its former glory, to rescue Egyptian civilization from the chaos and division that plagued it. Around 727 BCE, Piye marched north with his armies. What happened next is recorded on a magnificent granite stela found at Jebel Bakal, the victory stela of Piye. In detailed hieroglyphic text, Piye describes his conquest of Egypt city by city, presenting himself not as a foreign invader, but as a legitimate Egyptian pharaoh restoring Ma'at, divine order, to a fractured land. Piye was a fascinating character, a warrior who was also deeply pious. The stela records that when he captured Egyptian cities, he was more interested in visiting their temples than plundering their treasuries. When he took Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital, he performed the proper religious rituals before accepting the city's surrender. He was also particular about cleanliness. The stela records that when defeated Egyptian princes came to submit to him, Piye refused to meet with one of them because the man was uncircumcised, considered ritually impure. This detail reveals a ruler who took Egyptian religious traditions more seriously than the Egyptians themselves.
If Piye was the conqueror, his nephew Tahaka was the consolidator, the king who turned Kushite Egypt into a truly great empire. Tahaka ruled from 690 to 664 BCE, and his reign marked the high point of the 25th dynasty. Tahaka was a builder on a grand scale. He constructed temples and monuments throughout Egypt and Nubia. At Karnak, the great temple complex at Thebes, Tahaka added a massive colonnade with columns over 20 meters tall, the largest columns ever erected in Egypt. At Jebel Bakal in Nubia, he built a temple complex that rivaled anything in Egypt. But Tahaka was more than a builder. He was a skilled military commander who faced the greatest threat to ever menace Egypt, the Assyrian Empire. In the 600s and 70s BCE, The Assyrian king Esarhaddon invaded Egypt with an army equipped with iron weapons and siege technology far superior to anything Egypt or Kush possessed. Taharka fought bravely, but the Assyrians were too powerful. They drove him south, captured Memphis, and proclaimed themselves rulers of Egypt. Taharka retreated to Nubia, but he never gave up. He counterattacked, retook Memphis briefly, and only withdrew permanently when a second Assyrian invasion made clear that Egypt was lost. Even in defeat, Taharka was magnificent. He returned to Nubia with his dignity intact, ruling from Napata until his death. The Assyrians, despite conquering Egypt, never dared to invade Nubia itself. Taharka's military reputation kept them at bay. One of the most remarkable aspects of Kushite civilization was the power of its queens. In Kush, women could rule in their own right, not merely as regents for male heirs. These queens were called Kandakes, from which the name Candace derives. The Kandakes were not ceremonial figures. They were warrior queens who led armies, commanded fortresses, and conducted diplomacy with the greatest powers of the ancient world. The most famous Kandake was Queen Amanirenas, who ruled around 40 to 10 BCE. When the Roman Emperor Augustus, fresh from his conquest of Egypt, tried to extend Roman power into Nubia, he met his match in Amanirenas. Ancient Roman sources describe Amanirenas as a fierce warrior who lost an eye in battle, making her even more formidable. When Roman forces raided Nubian territory and toppled statues of Augustus, Amanirenas led her armies north in retaliation. Kushite forces attacked the Egyptian city of Aswan, captured Roman prisoners, and even dragged a bronze head of Augustus back to Meroe, where it was buried beneath the entrance to a temple, so that everyone walking into the temple would symbolically step on the Roman emperor. Rome sent reinforcements and pushed back into Nubia, but they could not defeat Amanirenas. After years of warfare, both sides agreed to peace. The treaty was remarkably favorable to Kush. Rome withdrew its forces, reduced its territorial demands, and exempted Nubia from Roman taxation. A one-eyed African queen had fought the Roman Empire to a standstill. Other Kandakes would follow: Amanishaketo, Nawidemak, and others. These women ruled as absolute monarchs, built pyramids, commanded armies, and left their mark on one of history's most egalitarian ancient civilizations. Behind every Kushite throne stood the priests of Amun, the supreme god of both Egypt and Kush. The priests were more than religious officials. They were kingmakers, advisors, and sometimes the true power behind the throne. The center of Amun worship in Kush was Jebel Bakal, a distinctive flat-topped mountain near Napata that the Kushites believed was the birthplace of Amun himself. At its base, they built magnificent temples where priests conducted elaborate rituals and oracles. These priests wielded enormous influence. According to some accounts, when a king grew old or weak, the priests could deliver an oracle from Amun, ordering the king to take his own life, and the king would obey. Whether this practice actually occurred is debated, but the stories reflect the priests' genuine power. The priests also played a crucial role in legitimizing royal authority. A Kushite king wasn't truly a king until he had been crowned at Jebel Bakal with the blessing of Amun's priests. This religious sanction gave Kushite rulers their divine mandate to rule and later to conquer Egypt in Amun's name. Our story begins in the midst of prehistory around 2500 BCE, when the first urban settlement emerged at Kerma, just south of the third cataract of the Nile. Kerma didn't spring up overnight. For thousands of years before, people had lived along the Nubian Nile, farming, herding cattle, and trading. But around 2500 BCE,
something changed. Population grew, villages merged, social hierarchies developed, and at Kerma, Africa's first great Nubian civilization was born. The early Kerma culture was sophisticated. They created beautiful pottery, thin-walled vessels with a distinctive black top and red body, considered some of the finest ceramics of the ancient world. They built circular houses with thick mud brick walls. They herded cattle, which held both economic and spiritual significance. Most importantly, they began to organize politically. By 2000 BCE, Kerma had emerged as the capital of a kingdom that controlled the Nile Valley between the second and fourth cataracts. This kingdom traded extensively with Egypt, exporting gold, ivory, ebony, incense, and cattle north, while importing Egyptian manufactured goods. But this trade relationship was unequal. Egypt, under the powerful Middle Kingdom pharaohs, saw Nubia as a source of resources to be exploited. Around 1900 BCE, Pharaoh Senusret III launched a massive military campaign into Nubia, pushing Egyptian control south to the Second Cataract. He built a series of massive fortresses, the most sophisticated military architecture of the Bronze Age, to control the Nile and extract Nubian wealth. These fortresses were formidable. Thick walls, multiple gates, drawbridges, bastions, and moats protected Egyptian garrisons. The largest at Buhen covered over 7 acres and had walls over 10 meters high. Egypt was clearly taking the Nubian threat seriously. For 400 years, Kerma chafed under Egyptian domination, but the kingdom survived, maintaining its cultural identity and building its strength. The rulers of Kerma continued to be buried in massive tumuli, surrounded by hundreds of sacrifice servants who would accompany them to the afterlife, a practice that showed both the rulers' absolute power and a religious system distinct from Egypt's. Then around 1700 BCE, Egypt's Middle Kingdom collapsed. The Hyksos, Asiatic invaders, conquered northern Egypt. Egyptian authority in Nubia evaporated almost overnight. Kerma's moment had come. The kingdom expanded rapidly, pushing north past the abandoned Egyptian fortresses. Kerma forces occupied the fortresses themselves, turning them into Nubian strongholds. At its peak, around 1650 BCE, the kingdom of Kerma controlled the Nile Valley from the Fourth Cataract all the way north to the First Cataract at Aswan, the border of Hyksos-controlled Egypt. The Kerma civilization reached its apex. The capital city grew to cover 25 hectares with massive mud brick buildings, including the famous Defufa, a temple structure over 18 meters tall that still stands today, the oldest standing structure in sub-Saharan Africa. Kerma had become a great power, dealing with Egypt as an equal. Diplomatic letters show that the Hyksos, as rulers of northern Egypt, and the kings of Kerma communicated as allies, possibly coordinating against the Egyptian resistance forces gathering in Thebes. But Egypt would not remain divided forever. Around 1550 BCE, the princes of Thebes launched a war of liberation against the Hyksos. They developed new military technology, the horse-drawn chariot, the composite bow, bronze-scale armor, and forged a new Egyptian state, the New Kingdom. These New Kingdom pharaohs were warrior kings, unlike any Egypt had seen before, and they had long memories. Egypt had been humiliated by the Hyksos invasion. Nubia had taken advantage of Egypt's weakness. Now Egypt would have its revenge. Pharaoh Thutmose I struck first around 1500 BCE. His armies swept south, smashing through Nubian defenses and pushing deep into Kerma territory. His son Thutmose II continued the conquest, but it was Thutmose III, Egypt's Napoleon, who delivered the final blow. Around 1450 BCE, Thutmose III's armies destroyed Kerma. The capital was burned, the kingdom was dismantled.
For the first time in 1,000 years, Nubia ceased to exist as an independent political entity. What followed was nearly 500 years of Egyptian occupation, the longest colonial period in African history. The new kingdom Pharaohs didn't just conquer Nubia, they attempted to Egyptianize it. They built massive temples to Egyptian gods throughout Nubia. They installed Egyptian administrators. They educated the sons of Nubian chiefs in Egyptian schools, teaching them to speak Egyptian and worship Egyptian gods. Pharaoh Ramesses II exemplified this cultural imperialism. He built the magnificent temples at Abu Simbel deep in Nubia, with colossal statues of himself carved into the living rock, a permanent declaration of Egyptian dominance. For Nubian culture, this was a disaster. The Kerma civilization's distinctive pottery styles disappeared. Indigenous religious practices went underground. The Nubian language survived, but Egyptian became the language of power and prestige. Yet the Nubians were not passive victims. They served in Egyptian armies, rising to high ranks. They worked as administrators, managing Egyptian interests in their homeland. And slowly, gradually, they absorbed Egyptian culture, not as subjects, but as equals and eventually as inheritors. By 1100 BCE, the elite of Nubia were thoroughly Egyptianized. They worshipped Amun. They built Egyptian-style temples. They wrote in hieroglyphics. They mummified their dead according to Egyptian practices. But here's the crucial point. They didn't see this as abandoning their identity. They saw themselves as becoming the true keepers of Egyptian civilization, more Egyptian than the Egyptians themselves. This would matter greatly in the centuries to come. Around 1070 BCE, the new kingdom of Egypt collapsed. Civil war, foreign invasions, and economic crisis tore Egypt apart. Egyptian authority in Nubia crumbled. Egyptian administrators fled north. And into this vacuum stepped a new Nubian power, the kingdom of Napata, centered on the city of Napata at the Fourth Cataract, near the sacred mountain of Jebel Bakal. This new kingdom was different from more ancient Kerma. These Nubians had thoroughly absorbed Egyptian culture, but they were building something new, a synthesis of Nubian independence and Egyptian civilization. The kings of Napata presented themselves as the legitimate successors to Egypt's pharaohs. They adopted Egyptian royal titles. They built Egyptian-style pyramids for their tombs. They worshipped Amun as their supreme god. But they ruled from Nubia, not Egypt, and they governed according to Nubian traditions. For 3 centuries, Napata grew in power and wealth. The kingdom controlled the gold mines of the Nubian desert. It dominated trade routes connecting Egypt with the African interior. Its armies became formidable, equipped with bronze weapons and manned by legendary Nubian archers. Meanwhile, Egypt continued its decline. The Third Intermediate Period saw Egypt fragment into competing kingdoms. Libyan dynasties ruled in the north. Egyptian petty kingdoms quarreled in the south. The great temples fell into disrepair. The old religious traditions were neglected. To the Kushite kings watching from Napata, this was intolerable. Egypt, the mother civilization, the land of the gods, was being desecrated by weak, impious rulers. The priests of Amun at Jebel Bakar delivered their oracles. Kush must intervene. Kush must save Egypt. Kush must restore Ma'at. Around 760 BCE, King Kashta made the first move. His armies crossed into Upper Egypt and occupied Thebes, the religious capital of Egypt and the center of Amun worship. Kashta didn't declare himself Pharaoh of all Egypt, not yet, but he controlled Egypt's spiritual heart, and he forced Thebes to recognize his daughter as the god's wife of Amun, the most powerful religious office in Egypt. Kashta was testing the waters. His son Piye would dive in completely. In 727 BCE, the situation in Egypt reached a crisis. A Libyan chieftain named Tefnakt had united the Delta kingdoms and was pushing south, threatening Thebes and Kushite interest. The priests of Amun consulted the god, and the oracle was clear. Piye must march north. Piye didn't rush. He spent a year preparing, gathering his armies, stockpiling supplies, and ensuring he had the full backing of Amun's priesthood. Then in 727 BCE, he led his forces north on a campaign that would change Egyptian history forever. The victory, Stela of Piye, gives us an unprecedented account of the campaign. Piye's armies swept through Upper Egypt, accepting the surrender of city after city. When he reached Thebes, he performed elaborate religious rituals, presenting himself as a pious pharaoh rather than a foreign conqueror. But not everyone surrendered peacefully. Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital, refused to open its gates. Piye laid siege to the city. When his scouts discovered that the Nile's flood had raised the water level on Memphis's northern side, supposedly the city's impregnable flank, Piye launched a surprise attack. Kushite soldiers seized the docks, scaled the walls, and captured Memphis in a single bold assault. The fall of Memphis broke Egyptian resistance. One by one, the rival kings of Egypt came to Piye's court to submit. He received them with dignity, but made clear who was master. When they tried to enter his palace, Piye refused them entry until they had been ritually purified. He considered them impure by his standards. Tefnakt, the Libyan who had started the conflict, never surrendered in person. He sent messengers with tribute and oaths of loyalty instead. Piye accepted this. He had proven his point. By 716 BCE, Piye controlled all of Egypt. He was recognized as Pharaoh from the Mediterranean to the Fourth Cataract. The Black Pharaohs had arrived. The 25th dynasty, the Kushite dynasty, would rule Egypt for over 50 years. These Black Pharaohs governed as legitimate Egyptian kings, adopting all the traditional pharaonic titles and performing all the traditional rituals. But they were also distinctly Nubian. They wore different royal crowns, adding the double rayus, two serpents instead of Egypt's traditional one. They continued to be buried in pyramids in Nubia, not in Egypt. They maintained their capital at Napata while ruling Egypt from Thebes and Memphis. Piye's brother Shabaka succeeded him around 707 BCE. Shabaka took Kushite control of Egypt even further. He moved the royal court to Memphis, the traditional Egyptian capital, presenting himself as a fully Egyptian pharaoh. He commissioned Egyptian monuments, sponsored Egyptian temples, and patronized Egyptian arts and letters. Shabaka also showed himself to be a religious reformer. He had ancient religious texts copied and preserved. He restored temples throughout Egypt. He presented himself as returning Egypt to its traditional values that the Libyans and Egyptians themselves had neglected. But it was Taharka, Shabaka's nephew, who would be the greatest of the Kushite pharaohs. Taking the throne around 690 BCE, Taharka ruled an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to the confluence of the White and Blue Niles, over 2,000 kilometers of the Nile Valley under one ruler. Taharka was a prodigious builder. At Karnak, his massive colonnade still stands. At Memphis, he constructed palaces and temples. Throughout Nubia, he built or renovated dozens of temples. At Kawa, Sanam, and other sites, inscriptions celebrate his piety and generosity. He also supported Egyptian culture. Scribes and artists flourished under his patronage. Egyptian art experienced a renaissance, looking back to Old Kingdom models for inspiration. This period, sometimes called the Kushite Renaissance, saw Egyptian civilization revitalized
by its African rulers.
But storm clouds were gathering from the east. The Assyrian Empire, centered in Mesopotamia, had become the most powerful military force in the ancient world. With iron weapons, siege technology, cavalry, and ruthless tactics, the Assyrians had conquered everything from Persia to the Mediterranean coast. Egypt was next on their list. In 674 BCE, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon launched the first invasion of Egypt. Taharka met him in battle and remarkably defeated him. The Assyrians withdrew and Taharka celebrated his victory with new monuments. But Esarhaddon came back. In 671 BCE, he returned with a larger army, better prepared and more determined. This time, the Assyrians broke through Taharka's defenses and captured Memphis. Taharka retreated south to Thebes and then to Nubia. For the next 7 years, Egypt became a battlefield. Taharka would counterattack and reclaim Memphis, only to face another Assyrian invasion. The Assyrians would conquer Egypt only to have Taharka drive them out again. It was a brutal stalemate. Finally, in 664 BCE, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal launched a massive invasion that settled the matter. Assyrian armies swept through Egypt, captured Thebes, and sacked the great city, looting temples, destroying monuments, and carrying away treasures accumulated over centuries. Taharka's successor Tantamani tried one last desperate counterattack but failed. The 25th dynasty was over. The Kushite Pharaohs withdrew to Nubia forever. Egypt would never be ruled from Nubia again. The loss of Egypt could have destroyed Kush, but instead it transformed it. Retreating to Nubia, the Kushite kings focused on consolidating their African kingdom, and what they built was remarkable. The kingdom of Napata continued to flourish for another 3 centuries. The kings still used Egyptian royal titles and maintained the fiction that they were pharaohs, but their focus was purely Nubian now. They built pyramids for their tombs at Nuri and El Kuru near Napata. These pyramids were smaller than Egypt's but more numerous. Eventually, Nubia would have more pyramids than Egypt. The royal tombs reveal extraordinary wealth. Gold jewelry, elaborate weapons, fine pottery, and luxury goods from across the Mediterranean world filled the burial chambers. Kush remained rich, controlling the gold mines and trade routes of the region. But the kingdom faced challenges. Egypt, now under the Said dynasty, became hostile. Conflicts erupted along the border. To the east, new powers emerged in Arabia, and within Nubia itself, the power dynamics were shifting. Around 591 BCE, an Egyptian army under Pharaoh Psamtik II invaded Nubia, sacking Napata and desecrating royal monuments. Although Kush recovered, the raid demonstrated Napata's vulnerability. The city was too close to Egypt, too exposed to northern aggression. Gradually, the center of power shifted south to a new city, Meroe. Around 300 BCE, Meroe became the official capital of Kush. Located between the 5th and 6th cataracts, over 500 kilometers south of Napata, Meroe was perfectly positioned. It sat near iron ore deposits, had reliable rainfall for agriculture, and controlled trade routes connecting the Nile Valley to the Red Sea and the African interior. The move to Meroe marked a fundamental transformation. The kingdom became less Egyptian and more distinctly African. A new culture emerged, the Meroitic civilization. The most visible change was linguistic. The Meroites developed their own script, both a hieroglyphic version for monumental inscriptions and a cursive version for everyday writing. Meroitic script was based on Egyptian hieroglyphics, but represented the Nubian language, not Egyptian. Today we can read Meroitic script phonetically, but we still cannot fully translate it. because Meroitic was a unique language, unrelated to any known language family. This makes Mero one of the great mysteries of African history. We can read their words but not understand their meaning. But Mero's greatest achievement was industrial. The city became an iron-working center on a scale unprecedented in Africa. Huge slag heaps still surround the ancient city, evidence of intensive iron smelting. Mero produced iron tools, weapons, and trade goods that spread throughout northeastern Africa. This made Mero extraordinarily wealthy and militarily powerful. While Mediterranean civilizations had been using iron for centuries, iron remained rare in much of Africa. Mero's iron monopoly gave it enormous economic and military advantages. In 30 BCE, Rome conquered Egypt. The Roman Emperor Augustus now controlled the Nile Valley up to Kush's northern border. It seemed inevitable that Rome, having swallowed Egypt, would attempt to conquer Nubia next. Augustus's prefect in Egypt, Gaius Petronius, decided to test Kush's defenses. In 25 BCE, Roman forces raided Nubian territory, destroyed statues of the Kandake, and occupied several border towns. This was a mistake. Queen Amanirenas, the reigning Kandake, responded with fury. She personally led an army north into Roman Egypt, attacking the garrison town of Syene and sacking the city of Philae. Her forces captured Roman prisoners, toppled statues of Augustus, and carried the bronze head of the emperor back to Mero as a trophy. Rome could not let this stand. Petronius led a counterattack, pushing deep into Nubia. Roman legions captured Napata and destroyed it. They marched further south toward Mero itself. But the Romans were stretched thin, fighting in unfamiliar desert terrain against an enemy who knew every rock and dune. Kushite forces harassed them constantly. Supply lines became precarious, and Amanirenas showed no sign of surrendering. Eventually, both sides agreed to negotiate. In 20 BCE, Kushite ambassadors traveled to the Greek island of Samos, where Augustus himself was staying. The negotiations were surprisingly favorable to Kush. Rome agreed to withdraw from Nubian territory, reduce the tribute demanded, and respect Kush's independence. Why did Rome, the mightiest empire in the world, make peace on such generous terms? Because conquering Nubia wasn't worth the cost. The region was poor by Mediterranean standards, the terrain was hostile, and Mero had proven it could make Roman occupation very expensive. Amanirenas had achieved what few ancient rulers ever managed. She had fought Rome to a standstill. After the peace with Rome, Mero entered a long, slow decline. The kingdom remained independent and continued building pyramids, temples, and palaces, but the quality of construction gradually deteriorated. The later pyramids at Mero are smaller, more crudely built, and show less artistic sophistication than earlier monuments. Several factors contributed to this decline. Trade routes shifted as the Red Sea became more important for Roman commerce, bypassing the Nile Valley. Environmental degradation, deforestation from iron smelting and overgrazing may have weakened the agricultural base. Political fragmentation seems to have occurred, with regional centers gaining independence from Mero's authority. But the final blow came from the south. The kingdom of Aksum, in what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea, rose to power in the first centuries CE. Aksum controlled the Red Sea trade, had close ties with Rome, and was expanding westward into the Nile Valley. Around 350 CE, King Ezana of Aksum invaded Meroe. Aksumite inscriptions, written in Greek, describe a victorious campaign against the Noba and Kasu, the people of Nubia and Kush. The Aksumites burned towns, captured livestock, and destroyed Meroitic power. Meroe was abandoned. The great city fell silent. The pyramids stopped being built. The
The Meroitic script ceased to be written. After 3,000 years, the kingdom of Kush was no more. For 2,000 years, the story of the Black Pharaohs was hidden, forgotten, and when rediscovered, often misunderstood or downplayed. European scholars of the 19th and early 20th centuries couldn't accept that Black Africans had conquered Egypt. They invented elaborate theories to explain away the evidence. Some claimed the Kushite pharaohs weren't really black, but were Mediterranean people who had migrated to Nubia. Others argued that while the Kushites might have ruled Egypt briefly, they contributed nothing to Egyptian civilization. These racist theories persisted well into the 20th century. Even today, many people learn Egyptian history without ever hearing about the 25th dynasty. The Black Pharaohs have been written out of history books, omitted from museum exhibits, and marginalized in popular media. This erasure was deliberate. It served a narrative that presented African civilizations as primitive and suggested that any achievements in Africa must have come from outside influences, from Egypt, from Arabia, from anywhere but indigenous African peoples. The truth is that Kush was thoroughly African. Yes, it absorbed Egyptian culture, but Egypt itself had absorbed Nubian influences for millennia. The relationship was reciprocal, not one-directional. And the Kushites created their own distinctive civilization that outlasted Egypt itself. One of the most hidden aspects of Kushite history is the extraordinary power and status of women. In most ancient civilizations, women were subordinate to men, excluded from political power, and relegated to domestic roles. Kush was different. Kushite queens are ruled in their own right, not just as regents. They commanded armies, conducted diplomacy, and built monuments. The title Kandake was equivalent to king, not queen consort. These were sovereign rulers. Moreover, royal succession in Kush didn't always follow the male line. Brothers might succeed brothers, nephews might succeed uncles, and sons might inherit from their mother's brothers rather than their fathers. This suggests a more complex kinship system than patrilineal succession, possibly with matrilineal elements. The Kandakes were depicted in royal art the same way male kings were, wearing the same crowns, holding the same symbols of power, performing the same rituals. Some reliefs show Kandakes smiting enemies, the traditional pharaonic pose of military dominance. This gender egalitarianism was rare in the ancient world and suggests that Kushite society had different values regarding women's roles than their Mediterranean neighbors. Another hidden element of Kushite history is the kingdom's deep connections to the African interior, connections that went far beyond Egypt or the Mediterranean world. Meroe, particularly, was oriented south and east, not north. The kingdom traded extensively with regions we now call South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and even further into Central Africa. Ivory, ebony, gold, iron, cattle, and enslaved people moved through Kushite trade networks, connecting the African interior to the wider world. Archaeological evidence shows that Meroe had contact with people from deep in Africa. Pottery styles, metalworking techniques, and the architectural features at Meroe show influences from sub-Saharan Africa, not just Egypt. The Meroitic language itself may have belonged to a Nilo-Saharan language family, linking it to languages spoken across the African Sahel, not to Mediterranean language families. In other words, Kush wasn't just a peripheral offshoot of Egyptian civilization. It was a major African kingdom in its own right, with its own cultural sphere, its own trade networks, and its own connections to the broader African continent. The religious life of Kush is often simplified as merely copying Egyptian religion, but the reality was more complex. Yes, Kushites worshipped Amun and other Egyptian gods, but they worshipped them differently. At Jebel Bakau, Amun was seen as a warrior god more than in Egypt. Kushite religious texts
emphasize Amun's martial aspects and his role in legitimizing kingship through military victory. Kushites also worshipped local Nubian gods that Egyptians didn't recognize. Apedemak, a lion-headed warrior god unique to Kush, had temples throughout Meroe. Sebiumeka, another indigenous deity, appears in Meroitic inscriptions but not Egyptian texts. The Kushites synthesized Egyptian and Nubian religious traditions, creating something new. This religious synthesis parallels their cultural synthesis. They were neither purely Egyptian nor purely Nubian, but both and something more. Everyone knows about Egypt's pyramids. Almost no one knows that Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt, over 200 Kushite pyramids compared to around 120 Egyptian pyramids. The Kushite pyramids are different from Egyptian ones. They are smaller, steeper, and built differently. Kushite pyramids have angles of about 70 degrees compared to Egypt's 52 degrees. They are also later. Most were built between 300 BCE and 300 CE, long after Egyptian pyramid building had ceased. These pyramids contained the burials of kings, queens, and nobles. Inside were treasures, offerings, and inscriptions. Many were topped with offering chapels where rituals were performed. Today, these pyramids sit largely forgotten in the Sudanese desert. Some have been damaged by treasure hunters. Others are slowly eroding. But they stand as testament to a civilization that rivaled Egypt in power, wealth, and cultural achievement. The fall of Meroe didn't erase Kushite influence from Africa. On the contrary, the kingdom's legacy spread throughout northeastern Africa and beyond. When Meroe fell, its people didn't disappear. They migrated, merged with other populations, and carried their culture with them. The ex-group culture and later the Christian Nubian kingdoms of Nobatia, Makuria, and Alodia emerged in the same regions Kush had once controlled. These Christian Nubian kingdoms, which lasted from the 6th to the 15th centuries CE, maintained many Kushite traditions. They built churches on the sites of Kushite temples. They continued some artistic styles. They even maintained a tradition of powerful queens, though now called queens rather than kandakes. Ironworking technology, which Meroe had pioneered in the region, spread across Africa. Some scholars argue that Meroitic ironworkers carried their knowledge west and south, contributing to the spread of iron technology across sub-Saharan Africa, though this remains debated. For nearly 1,500 years after Meroe's fall, the kingdom of Kush was forgotten. The pyramids at Meroe, Nuri, and Ekuru sat abandoned in the desert. The temples at Jebel Bakar fell into ruin. The Meroitic script became unreadable. European explorers rediscovered the pyramids in the 19th century, but early archaeological work was destructive. The Italian treasure hunter Giuseppe Ferlini blew up dozens of pyramids searching for treasure in the 1830s. He found some spectacular gold jewelry but destroyed irreplaceable monuments. Serious archaeological work began in the early 20th century, led by scholars like George Reisner of Harvard University. Reisner excavated extensively in Nubia, uncovering royal tombs, temples, and cities. His work revealed the extent and sophistication of Kushite civilization, but Reisner was also a product of his time. He couldn't accept that Black Africans had created such achievements, so he developed the Hamitic hypothesis, the racist theory that any advanced civilizations in Africa must have been created by lighter-skinned peoples from the Mediterranean or Middle East. This racist interpretation dominated Kushite studies for decades. Only in the latter half of the 20th century did scholars begin to properly acknowledge that Kush was an African civilization created by Black Africans. Today, archaeological work continues in Sudan, led increasingly by Sudanese scholars. New discoveries are being made constantly: temples, cities, inscriptions, and artifacts that continue to reveal the complexity and achievement of Kushite civilization. In modern Sudan, the legacy of Kush is complex and contested. Sudan is a diverse country with many ethnic groups, languages, and cultural traditions. The ancient Kushites are ancestors to some Sudanese people, particularly those in the northern regions, but not to all. Our modern Nubian people, ethnic Nubians who live along the Nile in southern Egypt and northern Sudan, see themselves as the direct descendants of the ancient Kushites. They maintain distinct languages, cultural practices, and identity separate from Arab Sudanese culture. However, the Nubian homeland has been devastated by modern development. The construction of the Aswan High Dam in the 1960s flooded much of Nubian territory, forcing the relocation of tens of thousands of Nubians and drowning countless archaeological sites. Some monuments, like Abu Simbel, were relocated at great expense, but many smaller sites were lost forever. Despite these challenges, Nubian cultural identity remains strong. Nubians take pride in their connection to the ancient Kushite civilization and work to preserve their language and traditions. The Kingdom of Kush holds important lessons for how we understand African and world history. First, it demonstrates that African civilizations were not isolated or primitive. Kush was a sophisticated state that engaged with the Mediterranean world, the Middle East, and the African interior. It produced art, architecture, literature, and technology that rivaled any civilization of its era. Second, it shows that the relationship between Egypt and sub-Saharan Africa was not one-directional. For too long, scholars assumed that all civilization in Africa flowed from Egypt southward. Kush proves that influence moved in both directions, that African peoples south of Egypt influenced Egyptian civilization and at one point literally ruled it. Third, it reveals the complexity of cultural identity in the ancient world. The Kushites weren't simply imitating Egypt. They were creating a unique synthesis of Egyptian, Nubian, and other African cultural elements. They could be both thoroughly Egyptianized and distinctly Nubian at the same time. Fourth, it highlights the role of women in ancient African societies. The Kandakes of Kush ruled with an authority that few women in the ancient Mediterranean world could match. This challenges assumptions about gender roles in ancient societies. Finally, Kush reminds us that civilizations rise and fall, but their legacies endure. For 3,000 years, Kush survived conquests, occupations, invasions, and disasters. When it finally fell, it left behind pyramids, temples, inscriptions, and cultural traditions that continue to influence the region today. The story of Kush is not finished. Archaeologists continue to excavate new sites, revealing more about this remarkable civilization. The Meroitic script may yet be deciphered, opening up hundreds of inscriptions to modern understanding. In Sudan, despite political instability and economic challenges, efforts continue to preserve and study Kushite monuments. UNESCO has designated several Kushite archaeological sites as World Heritage Sites, including the pyramids at Meroe and the temples at Jebel Bakar. Museums around the world are beginning to give Kushite artifacts the prominence they deserve. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the British Museum in London, and the Sudan National Museum in Khartoum all have significant Kushite collections. And in the broader world, awareness of Kush is growing. Books, documentaries, and academic studies are bringing the Black Pharaohs and the Kandakes to wider audiences. The story of Africa's hidden empire is finally being told. What can we learn from the Kingdom of Kush? Perhaps the most important lesson is about historical visibility. For too long, African achievements have been hidden, minimized,
or attributed to outside influences. Kush reminds us that Africa has always been home to sophisticated civilizations that created remarkable achievements. The story of Kush also teaches us about cultural identity and synthesis. The Kushites didn't have to choose between being Egyptian and being Nubian. They created something that was both and something new. This speaks to broader human experiences of cultural mixing, adaptation, and innovation. The resilience of Kush is another powerful lesson. This civilization survived Egyptian conquest, Assyrian invasion, and eventually Roman expansion. When it could no longer compete militarily with northern powers, it adapted, moving its capital south and transforming into a different kind of kingdom. This adaptability allowed Kush to survive for 3,000 years, longer than almost any other civilization in human history. The Kanda caves of Kush remind us that gender roles are culturally constructed, not universal. In a world where most ancient civilizations excluded women from power, Kush shows that alternatives were possible. Queens ruled as sovereigns, led armies, and built monuments. This challenges us to think more critically about assumptions regarding gender and power. Finally, Kush teaches us about the interconnectedness of the ancient world. This was not an isolated civilization. It traded with Egypt, Rome, Arabia, India, and the African interior. It absorbed influences from all these regions while maintaining its own distinct identity. Kush was both thoroughly African and thoroughly cosmopolitan. The kingdom of Kush was not a footnote to Egyptian history. It was a major African civilization that deserves to be studied, celebrated, and remembered on its own terms. Its pyramids, temples, queens, and pharaohs are part of the shared heritage of humanity, a testament to what African peoples achieved in antiquity, and a reminder of stories yet to be uncovered. And so ends the story of the kingdom of Kush, Africa's hidden empire, the land of the Black Pharaohs, the civilization that rivaled Egypt and outlasted Rome. For 3,000 years, the Kushites built pyramids, forged iron, crowned queens, and defended their independence against the greatest powers of the ancient world. They conquered Egypt, they fought Rome to a standstill, they created art, architecture, and a writing system that still challenges us today. Their story has been hidden for too long, but the pyramids still stand in the Sudanese desert. The temples still rise at Jebel Bakal. The treasures still shine in museums, and now finally the world is beginning to remember. If you found this documentary fascinating, please subscribe to Africa Hidden History. We are dedicated to uncovering the forgotten stories of African civilizations, the empires, kingdoms, and cultures that shaped our world but have been erased from mainstream historical narratives. In our next episode, we'll explore another hidden African empire, the Kingdom of Aksum, which conquered Kush, dominated Red Sea trade, and became one of the world's first Christian kingdoms. Hit that like button, turn on notifications, and join us as we continue uncovering Africa's hidden history. Because Africa's past is not primitive, it's not simple, it's not a footnote to European or Middle Eastern history. Africa's past is glorious, complex, sophisticated, and it's time the world knew the truth. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the hidden stories of our shared human past.
Je laptop, hij doet het nog, maar hij is onwijs traag. Hoog tijd voor een nieuwe dus. Alleen,